Professional sport is one of the most visible and influential performance ecosystems in the world. It shapes how millions of people think about effort, identity, leadership, winning, failure, masculinity, resilience, and even worth. Yet the systems around elite athletes have historically been built to extract performance rather than cultivate flourishing. The real question David Clancy's work raises is this: what if professional sport became a laboratory for designing environments where humans flourish under pressure rather than merely survive it? And what if humanity, already obsessed with this version of ourselves, was made better by its example? Through his work with Next Level Group, David is not just coaching individuals. He is attempting to influence the architecture of culture inside elite sport, shifting the focus from short-term output to sustainable human performance rooted in flow, psychological safety, meaning, and collective trust. This conversation explores what it would mean to change sport at scale so that the same systems that currently produce championships could also produce healthier humans, stronger teams, and leadership models capable of influencing culture far beyond the stadium. But first, let's get to know David a little bit. David Clancy is a sports medicine specialist, performance consultant, and CEO and co-founder of the Next Level Group, a global firm working with elite professional sports teams to build high-performance cultures and leadership ecosystems. With more than 15 years in sports medicine, physiotherapy, and performance support, David has advised organizations across the NBA, NFL, Premier League football, and other elite competitions. Trained in physiotherapy and sports and exercise medicine at Keele University and Trinity College in Dublin, he's also held research roles and serves as faculty at Florida International University. David's work focuses on the systems behind elite performance, the leadership, the culture, the talent networks, and well-being structures that allow teams and individuals to thrive under pressure. Through consulting, education, and talent development, he works with organizations around the world to rethink how high-performance environments are designed so that both performance and human development can flourish. David Clancy, it's about damn time. Welcome to the Flourish Feed podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Gillian, it's always it always kind of sits you back a little bit when you hear what you're currently working on. But look, really delighted to be here. Calling all the way over from Dublin, Ireland. You hit on so many words there that I really think resonate a lot with me. You know, human development, sustainability, trust. So many big words that I'm sure we'll get into. But yeah, where are we going to start?
Well, a lot of those words that you just mentioned, I think, are reasons why you and I resonated from the very first time we met. But the place that I want to start is that moment when you encounter a new team environment. What are the signals that tell you immediately whether that ecosystem, supports performance or drains it? Like what you've entered a new space, and all of those words that really matter to you are right at the top of your mind. What are the first signals you see?
And it's always, any time I have the opportunity, and I do, I'm fortunate to get the opportunity to visit lots of different clubs and teams around the world. And I always go in with trying to get a feel. So the second you open up the door, trying to get a feel as to what's it like in the air. And I can really vividly remember going to a rugby club, not my rugby club, a rival rugby club a couple of years ago. And this team is extremely successful, right? Leinster Rugby, they've sustained success for a long, long time. And they don't have loads and loads of money in comparison to an NFL team or an NBA team. But I was curious as to what it was about this sort of environment when I'd walk into it that would speak to why they're so successful. And it's not just the players on the pitch. And I remember walking in and the feeling when I left the building going, they just do all the little things really, really well here. Like, no small thing is not a small thing. And then I think all the small things say all the big things. But I think there was always a real level of precision and quality with conversations. Everyone was present. They were there where their feet were. Everyone was really courteous. The place wasn't messy. I think everyone also understood what the roles were, what they were doing. It's not like they were there having to make sure that their position was stable and safe, right? So they were all just being authentic and true to what they were doing. I just think that was a real high performing environment. And so when I walk into a place, you're trying to sense, is there vagueness here? Is there ambiguity here? Is there politics going on? What's the energy like? Is this place driven by money or is it driven by a different sort of purpose? And I think when you can sense a place like Leinster, which is hard for me to say because I'm a Munster man, right? Um, there seem to be high standards there, but a high level of safety with the standards.
Mm,
A lot of accountability, a lot of clarity. Everyone kind of knew what they were doing. So there was a lot of alignment. And all that speaks to just real high energy. So it's no wonder as to why they're really successful. So a lot of that stuff is kind of hard to measure. It's not
mm,
really quantitative, but you can feel it. And like I've
you
walked
can
into other
feel it.
environments and I've kind of gone, there's something not quite right here. Something's off. What is it? And I think when you spend a bit of time, you'll see things or you'll sense things or you'll notice things or conversations or the way people talk about others. And those sort of signals you can kind of pick up and that can be a barometer as to, oh, this place is really functional and high performing or not quite there. And that's kind of what I look for usually as a first impression.
That's a lot. Because and
Not
a
really
lot
an
of it really.
audit, it's more of a feel before an audit.
No kidding. Okay, so there is an audit step because that was going to be my next question is you've entered a space, it kind of hits the mark somewhere between a 1 and a 10 on what you just described. And now you've got to go about doing the work of figuring out and assessing how can I help here. So this step 1 is a kind of a gut feel. And then there's a process of an audit, which I would expect there would be. You're a pretty scientific guy, but when you do this audit, I don't want to go into examples so much as I want to ask, what's the read like? What's the feeling like? Is there a general level of acceptance that you're there to add value in this way, or is this new for a lot of people that kind of audit should be taking place in their organization?
There's there's two ways I'll answer that, and it's context dependent, right? So with some of my work, it's recruitment, and it's very clear that it's headhunting. So you're going in and you're benchmarking an organization from a organizational sort of perspective and saying, this is your headcount, this is the balance across these sort of departments. It's clear that you're missing probably somebody with these areas of expertise in this sort of character or this sort of leader, and then that's kind of where you go. If it's more around, you already have your people, you've got a good balance across your department, you're just wanting to dial that up a little bit more, then that's a little different. And it's nearly the latter, even to your body language, right, is what lights me up a little bit more because that sometimes is a little bit harder. And I think you have to be a little bit more delicate because it's not like someone saying to you, we need a new doctor. So it's already upfront and everyone understands. I think when it's more around everyone's here, I usually just come in with the sort of questions as to, well, where are you trying to go from here? Or you're already doing a lot of great things. Where do you think you can improve? So very much acknowledging and affirming that there's already a lot of good work here
Mm,
and that the
mhm.
people are doing great work and there's good systems and processes. But what do you think would make that little bit more of impact difference? And then I think you win people over. And
Yeah.
I think I think too, I'll just come it back to, I think I'll come back to trust because I think some people you lean with credibility. Some people lean in with vulnerability. Some people lean in with, it's all about them. So I think if you can understand where and how to bridge and nurture trust and get it early, I think that always
Mhm.
helps when you're facilitating steps to improve a situation that's already probably pretty good.
I tell you, I did light up in the second example, and it's because it sounds like it's such an art form. Like there's so much sending and receiving of message that is almost nonverbal from the very beginning in order to really connect with what's happening and what's going to be needed to help that organization elevate and achieve their goals. But at the beginning, it sounds like it starts with their goal. It's not your goal for them. It really starts with what you understand from a collection of information of various people you talk to, what their goals might be for elevating their situation. So I think this is such a fascinating example of a laboratory for human performance. And you and I talked about this just before we started, that organizationally, whether it's a sports team or a corporation, that's kind of what we're all looking to do is raise the game. So my next question is, it seems it's come a long way in terms of sport and human performance and so forth, but I feel like there's still this at least sense from the public that a lot of athletes are leaving sport or finishing a season mentally, emotionally, and physically diminished or drained. So what would have to change in the system for that outcome to become unacceptable? Like, what would have to change so that no matter how the season ended or no matter where you are in your growth cycle of developing a team, that people went home proud of what they did and
Ooh,
connected the way
such
you
a
described that first team?
yeah, it's such a big question. And I mean, seek first to understand, bring in empathy, all these wonderful things you'd like to lean into there, Gillian. But it's harsh, but the truth of it is a lot of the time in the sports world, players are seen as assets, right? They're seen
Mm,
as, commodities that as if it was a stock that you're trading, you're selling, you're signing, you're just letting go, releasing after a bad injury. It
yeah,
happens, right? You blow out a knee,
yeah.
you could be gone the next day, your contract's done, right? The shelf life for a running back in the NFL is not that long, right? But I think, the how this can improve, and I suppose it's why I really dug into well-being a couple of years ago, was there has to be a different and a better way, right? I mean, we're currently working with an expansion WNBA team, and kudos to them because they've been really upfront with, as part of their vision, what they want to do is build a sustainable player. So build a sustainable athlete. They're not just interested in a power forward lasting 4 seasons and being exceptional for 4 seasons and then flaming out and then trading their way. They're looking at success as to, can this power forward play at that level for 10 seasons? So what would they need to do from an environmental perspective, from a personnel perspective, from a management of load perspective, to not burn the athlete out? Now, that team, who are definitely going to be trying some different ways of as to how to measure success, I don't know if well-being is a KPI there, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
don't know if they're going to look at that versus minutes or points scored on the court. But I think if you can set up a system where you're just trying to think of the athlete more, like we were taught as physios, right, in sports medicine, patient first, athlete centric, player goes in the middle, everyone's around that player. But I don't know if that always really is really the truth as to what happens when you see how some of them are managed or
Yes.
mismanaged. So
Yes.
I think a lot of the time it comes down to the system. It comes down to the ethos and philosophy of the people steering the ship. And if you have an owner, manager, head coach that really do care about health and well-being and not just the short term.
Well, that's it. It's a long-term story, and I think you said it was WNBA, so I don't want to harp too hard on that, but it sounds like a different model for a different type of athlete, which is somebody who, females have different parts of their life cycle, and yet here we are at the beginning of a professional women's sport, maybe epoch, where we have the opportunity to look to different models. It's interesting because when I began a program a few years back called the Muscle Money Mindset, which was coaching for female executives, founders, CEOs, and advisors, the idea was to help them transform themselves from endurance athletes to shot calling masters of their own destiny, performance athletes, people who could just sort of like run 100 meters on a dime, not necessarily, but proverbially speaking, right? Like be able to to go into flow at will. And it sounds a lot like, this sustainable model that you're talking about where the athlete's at the very middle. It has this short-term potential of not being about money, which is what the old model's really about, right? Is maximizing dollars from the minute one at any cost. It has a short-term potential of not being about money, but it has a long-term potential of actually being more profitable because you're spending less time maybe integrating a new athlete every time someone blows a knee. So are there possible KPIs around this other sustainable model that could be financially like make it viable, or is it just a little bit too on the goodwill side of things? What do you think as somebody who's actually done this in teams?
Yeah, it's good because straight away I'm thinking of language you hear in the business world, attrition and retention of staff, right? And turnover of your employees. And what about that for the player? So
Right.
rather than running your players to the ground because it's all about output and performance metrics, why not think of, well, how can we keep them at a really high level, but actually we want to retain them. We want to
Yeah.
we want to keep them playing really well for a longer period of time, and that actually might save us money. And wouldn't that be an interesting sort of statement to intent? So I think again it comes back to short-term performance versus potential long-term gain. And I think more often than not, right, the tortoise can win. So I think
Mm.
again, head coach, manager, how have they been brought up? How have they been taught? What have they read? But I
Yeah.
think, yeah, I think the teams that get that right, like there's a huge way of actually. There was a great piece of science that came out of Australia a couple of years ago. A fellow called Ben Darwin. He used to be a rugby player. He retired prematurely because of an injury, and he came up with this framework called the Teamwork Index, Cohesion
Mm.
Index.
Mm.
Basically, it was written in a book called Edge, and he wrote and studied a lot on turnover of teams, and that the teams that had less turnover of players, never mind staff, ultimately probably did better because there was more stability in the system. There was less of having to get to know new people, and they actually won longer for the long run. So I
I
think
bet. Yeah.
it's uh it's definitely something we should be looking at.
It's a like I equate it to a dynastic way of thinking. If we could extrapolate that onto the way that we steward our planet, or we open up a new company or a new restaurant, if we think about it in a longer term sense, then we want to be forming and forging really good bonds and lasting relationships between, vendors and suppliers and so forth. It's the same, I think, in any culture. And there are beautiful examples of that. And I will probably currently use the Toronto Blue Jays as a good example of that there are people who've come out who are Toronto Blue Jays in the last week or so saying, I don't care what anybody pays me as a Blue Jay or anywhere else, I'm staying a Blue Jay. And it's because they've forged such a powerful culture. Um, so that's really, really helpful. I really like that distinction, but also the alignment and looking at how corporations kind of look at assets and employee retention and churn versus the power that could come from a more sustainable athlete model. Now, I said this word a couple minutes ago, or you did, one of us did, and you and I are both huge fans of flow and proponents of flow. And it's often talked about an individual state, but I think what we're hinting on here is that it can also operate at this collective team level, which is such a beautiful feeling when it happens. So how does it become collective? How do you get there? Have you seen that happen in teams that you've consulted with where it's just all of a sudden the magic just presents itself?
It's starting to become more, um, I suppose, seen even by the public when there's a team that, let's use our language, looks like they're coherent, right? So it looks like they're on the same page and everything's clicking and there's clarity of roles and intent and trust and alignment. And I think you see that in on a team, on a pitch, when you see something didn't quite go right and a team
Hmm.
huddles together and they
Mm.
have a really strong conversation and they come back and they kind of get it right. They're in that sort of state where they trust each other. It's not, there's no judgment here. There's clear intent. Everyone understands their roles. and they're very much back to on the same page. You see that sometimes with the Irish rugby team has gained a lot of press over the last couple of years where when they're collecting themselves, be it after they've made a great play or not so much, they come to a huddle and they do breath work. The captain, Caelan Darras, Rian Darras's brother,
Really?
will will take the huddle and will get them to do some box breathing. And you've seen it, we see it on the broadsheets here on the front page, or you'll see it on the TV. And what are they doing? Well, they're probably syncing as a team into a
Yeah.
state of group flow, right? And and I think where that's really interesting, if an individual has made a bad play, they've dropped the ball, they've given the ball away, they've lapse of judgment, but you bring the team back collectively, again, this sense of coherence. What can we do to bring us back to an aligned sense of team? We can all understand when a team looks like they're playing together and playing as one unit. So I think those sort of examples are becoming a little bit more obvious to the public when you can see those sort of signals. And I mean, we don't need to go into the kind of group triggers. That's maybe for people listening to your show, Gillian, but
Yeah.
you can definitely see when you see a team that's not clicking, like team clicking, it's when they just look disjointed and when they
Hmm.
look like there's mixed signals and there's noise and they're not communicating well and they don't quite know what they're doing and where they're going and all this sort of obvious stuff. But
Yeah.
that's why it's falling apart. So I think when all those things are coming together, that's a huddle and that's a sort of strong we over an I. And I
There
think
you
that's
go.
what it can look like in a sort of team environment. That could be 5 players on a basketball court. That could be on that could be you know, NHL team, you name it, right? But I think
Yeah.
the sort of signals and symptoms of that are quite clear to see.
And it's hard not to think that in that first team that you described, Leinster, and in this team, and with Caelan as the
Who
leader
plays
on
at
the pitch, if
Leinster?
you will.
Who plays
He
at
plays for
Leinster?
Leinster. Okay, so there we go. Uh, it's hard not to think that the colloquial term we use, at least on this side of the pond, is the fish stinks from the head down. Like, it's hard not to think that a lot of that really starts at the top. So how do leaders, we can talk about how they create it. Those were great examples of how they create it. How do they unintentionally destroy those conditions? What gets in the way of being that kind of leader? Because it does kind of start with somebody telling us which direction to row the boat in.
I think if you don't know what direction you're going in, so if there's a lack of a let's use the sports analogy that can be translated to business. If there's a lack of a clear game model, like how can we win? What does success look like? What do we need to do to succeed? That's translatable to any domain. I think if there's a sense of there's a lack of strength through relationships, right? So again, lack of trust, broken communication, feedback's not quite what it needs to be, um, too much noise, not enough signal, like all those kind of things. I, I'm a huge believer. Like I ran an event, Gillian, in November, and like we started the event spending 2 hours talking about clarity and communication, like collaboration and connection and community and all these wonderful things. I think come after
Mm.
everyone's really clear on what they're doing, and when communication is as it needs to be in the system for the people that works. But I think if you get either of them wrong, then it comes back to the question you asked. That's when you start to see problems and when conditions aren't being met and when you just don't get into that sort of sense of a shared sort of flow state.
I can't help but think of, I think you and I have talked about this, but a big part of my Flourish framework is built around the Harvard study that started in 1938, the Harvard study of adult development. And you look at those top 5 factors, the first one being positive social connection, the second one being meaning and purpose. You're very much hitting on the fact that if we don't hit those 5 factors in a game model or in a leadership structure, all the way down to what is the goal, what is the goal? What's my role within that? How do I have autonomy and how am I contributing? What's my clear bounded role, as you talked about with the Leinster team? I think those 5 factors end up translating very nicely to a corporate model and also to a team model as well. So Now thinking about teams again, sports teams. Let's sit with sports teams, and then we can always extrapolate. Most teams measure them success in terms of wins or contracts or championships. But if we wanted to measure the health of a performance ecosystem instead, like the kind of shot calling performance ecosystem we're talking about, what indicators would you track? What would be your KPIs? And or you could say, which metrics are we currently using that are kind of dangerous or incomplete?
Oof. Again, like I love energy. I'm a big believer. People should be able to map their energy and understand what gives them energy, what takes energy, right? And I've done that with 50 teams and businesses. And so I think, and it's quite easy to gauge it and kind of look at your week. I think energy, I think giving a census to scoring as to quality of a relationship, like level of like the trust quotient, that trust
Trust.
equation.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then that dovetails in with feedback mechanisms. I'd be looking at that. I think that's, for a high flow environment, that's high challenge, but high support. You need feedback, you need good comms. That leads itself to Amy Edmondson's work, right? That sense as to this is a psychologically safe environment where we can make and admit a mistake, but we're going to keep moving forward. Um, PERMA, right? I mean,
Yeah.
we've rolled that out now with two teams recently as part of a strategic pause, essentially just a set of questions for the players, front office, coaches, and performance staff for
Pause there
them
for a
to,
second for people who don't know what PERMA is. Before you go into describing how you rolled it out, can you just give the
yeah,
definition of what
yeah.
PERMA means, what it stands for?
Yeah, pretty sure a fellow called Martin Seligman came up with PERMA, and I'd say everyone go and have a look. There's this beautiful wheel, and they all look pretty similar, right? But it's a way of you scoring as to how you are in terms of P for positive emotion, for engagement, how engaged you are with your work, your job. Chips is the R. So again, I'm a big believer. I think relationship connection is massively important in an environment. M, Gillian, you said it a couple of minutes ago, kind of meaning, you know, so what? Like, is this really important? Do I understand what I'm doing? And then A speaks for accomplishment. So again, that kind of sort of, that loftiness level of the North Star. So I think, again, we rolled it out with two teams recently where off the back of the normal sort of questions in the type form survey, we said, have a look at this model and gauge yourselves out of 5 where you think you are on this PERMA sort of wheel. And it was really interesting because some people would, you know, think they're really engaged with their works and everything, very strong with the relationships, but it might be lack of meaning. And like that's really profound. And there's a lot
No
of
kidding.
insight there. So
Yeah,
um
that's one of the massive building blocks. If there isn't a feeling of meaning and nobody's really diagnosed that, then we got to fix that before we can fix anything else. I want to talk specifically, you mentioned energy, and it's been one of my big topics to try and help other people understand by unpacking it with guests once in a while. Because unlike these phones that we carry around and that do everything for us, we don't have little meters on us that tell us when we're charged, and we don't have an indicator necessarily or a great index of what depletes our energy or adds to it, which is why I think the importance of an energy audit like you're talking about is so important. But I look at that through the same lens as I look at attention, which is that's another thing that we don't really have a great gauge for, not the same way we do with time, and certainly not the same way we do with understanding a quantum of money. So I'm wondering what happens, or where do you have opinions or observations at the intersection of those two things, of energy and attention? Because I think when one is depleted, the other's depleted, but also spending too much in one area can actually deplete the other. So is that a thing that you see? And what are your comments on that intersection?
yeah, like where attention goes, energy flows or performance goes. I think
Yeah.
I'm a huge believer that, you have to look after your energy, right? And if something's killing or depleting your energy, try to identify and find the sources of it. Now, it's not to say we all have jobs that require and take energy from us that we kind of have to do. Um, but you don't want that to be the case too often. So I think understanding, like I often talk about this quadrant of mapping your energy and understanding what replenishes your energy and where you get recovery from. And you need to find moments in a day and in a week where you understand that can be something as simple as getting fresh air and light or drinking water, or it could be doing a yoga nidra, or it could be doing a gym session, or it could be spending time with your children, or ending early on a Friday. So I think really mapping energy in a week is massively insightful to help you understand. Actually, I always think kids drive me crazy, but actually they give me a lot of good energy. So it will help you sometimes frame things
Yeah.
different. And I think, yeah, attention, of course, it's definitely worth interrogating where you put your attention, right? If you have the opportunity, the job allows for it, the autonomy, the time, if you can unpack where you're putting your attention, therefore you're not putting attention somewhere else. More often than not, I think anyway, energy kind of goes hand in hand with it more often than not. So
Hmm.
if you're pouring a lot of attention over into this project or this conversation or this relationship, that might give you energy or take your energy. And again,
But
just
you need to know it.
you
You
need to
need
be
to
able to
figure that out.
define it. You need to
Yeah,
know.
for sure. So when you
Yeah.
look
So
at a great team, I like this term called cognitive bandwidth, which is the ability to sort of have the space to take on focus. How do great teams protect their cognitive bandwidth? What are they doing differently? And I ask this question almost selfishly, but also for my son. What does a great team do in a training environment before a game? Maybe in their when they're in sort of a lockdown situation, only being with each other. What are they doing, or what do you even prescribe they do in order to protect that cognitive bandwidth?
try not to make it too complicated. Like in our world now, we love complicated things. We love complexity. We're always trying to keep up. So I think for your family or for, try to keep it simple. Like, what do you need to do? What are the priorities? What's important? What are the three things today? It doesn't have to be eight things.
Mm.
Can you say it in 5 words rather than 9 words? Like simple language, Feynman technique, all that kind of stuff. And I think, like like we said it a couple of minutes ago, like I'm a big believer in prioritization, the whole Eisenhower matrix, importancy and urgency. And I think for people that don't know that, have a look at it. It's been so important for me. And when I lecture, I always bring that in. But I think there's a lot of stuff that you don't need to get caught up into, and there's a lot of stuff you don't have to do, and there's a lot of stuff that maybe you can delegate or just delete.
Yeah.
So try to, and I'd say the last thing too, with AI, which we might get to, Gillian, I'm sure, we can find ways to help um, remove us having to duplicate things, right? So if there's something that's repeating itself more often, just you don't probably have to do it as much. So
Hmm.
again, I think if you want to look after yourself a little bit more, do less, keep it a bit simpler. And can you find a way that someone else can do it for you? If it's possible, maybe that is AI, that'll free up time for you.
Yeah, I think a lot of people for in a lot of circumstances, they probably find that the most control they can get is by having a fixed routine of what they do and what someone else does. But what you're proposing, I think, is even more liberating, which is always be questioning what it is that you do. Because right now, it seems like we have an increasing number of tools and agents that can help take some of that load off. But also, we have an increasing number of things that are maybe being asked of us that aren't necessary. They're just noise. And I really like that idea of continuously updating the program, like updating. And you're very good at that. Like ever since I've known you, you're always in a process of, well, it's not reinvention, it's refinement of how you invest your time and your
I
energy.
just I just add to that before we move on, but thanks. I think another exercise for people to do that, again, I've done it for myself and for others, is like if you're feeling overwhelmed or anxious or there's a lot going on and oh my God, where do I start? Just write on a sheet of paper like controllables and uncontrollables. And I think firstly getting it out of your head and onto paper, analog, like I have a notepad here.
With a pen. Yeah.
with a pen. That's what I'm using today.
Yeah.
Firstly, when you write down what you can control, what you can't control, it's so hard. I don't get it right half the time. And even today, I didn't get it right. There's a lot of stuff I wanted to control, but I couldn't. But I think it gives you, it's liberating, and it gives you headspace. And I think for people that feel a little bit, you know, there's a lot going on, I think doing something as simple as that, that takes 5 minutes, can really help.
It's brilliant, and it's actually a question that I put in my pre-meeting kit for any of my clients that I work with. One of the sections, it's only 3 sections long, but one of the sections asks them to identify the things that are causing them stress right now, and more often than not, the ones that they are able to control are not causing them stress. The ones that they are not able to control, like the markets or geopolitical or what have you, those are the things that are giving them stress. And so, what I love about your exercise is A, it's simple. Anyone can do it anytime. B, we're using a pen and we're taking a pause, which means we're probably breathing differently than we were before we started to write it down. And C, you're cognitively looking at this list of things that you've labeled as I have no control over this. And therefore, what would you do with that? Like, what's your next step once you have the list of the things you can't control? Do you have a process? Do you have a yeah.
Yeah, and again, like, I use it for me to kill loops that don't serve me, right? So
Mm.
to that point, if there's something happening in the stock market that's like, oh my God, that's crashing, but you write it down and maybe, you bought it and you're gonna leave it and you can't control it per se, it can stop the rumination for a moment. And I would be one that tends to ruminate or sometimes thinks about things, especially if it's my family or something, health related. But if you've done what you can, put it down on paper and cross it off.
And
And
let
I
it go.
think
Oh, I love the crossing it
let it
off.
go.
Yeah.
Let it
That's
like
that's the
tear
thing,
the
the letting it go. Yeah.
and then tear the sheet of paper, and the
Yeah.
whole sense as to throwing it into a bin, it does all these beautiful things for our biology, right? So I think keep it simple, find that system that works for you and cross those lines off. It'll feel good for your brain.
Fantastic. Now, I know one of your passions, you're working individually with teams, you're working across different types of teams and different sports, but I think you also have a bit of a desire for change at scale. I'm wondering what your thoughts are for change at scale. What does that look like in professional sport? If you could envision it or if you have.
I think some teams think it's all about people, right? Let's hire, let's hire, let's hire, let's bring in more. Not sure sometimes, but I've seen examples when there's just too many people and then there's a lack of R&R and people don't know really what they're doing, and there's it doesn't quite work out. Like, I've actually really learned in the last couple of years, I think if you get systems and processes really tight and strong, and you've got the right people on the right seats on the right bus, that boat does go faster, right? But I think a lot of it comes down to, if you want to scale fast, right? Masters of scale, Reid Hoffman and all that wonderful stuff. Get the basics, like the whole Tim Duncan fundamentals. I think if, he kissed it off the glass and became a Hall of Famer, I think get your daily routines down. And Gillian, who knows better than you about this sort of thing, right? But I
Well,
think get
you
you
and I both resonate well on that. We know the central importance of that.
But if an organization is trying to change at scale, look at your routines, look at behaviors, mirror, look at what you're doing, look at what you're measuring, like, Drucker, if you can't measure it, right? Look at your organizational metrics and where are you trying to get better and why are you trying to get better there? Like, ask that second question. And then I think you can build the systems around it so that you can repeat success more consistently. And then you can scale, with velocity quicker. But I think,
Faster.
if you're trying to set up more leaders in your department, you can develop them, right? You don't, you can develop them, but you can't just assume they're going to develop. You need to create the environment and the culture and the
Mhm.
process and the space to allow them to get to the point where they're developing. And I think
Mhm.
that's the same with recruitment. That's the same with, again, just creating that sense when you walk into a place that While they're moving fast, but they're moving fast at a high level and they're just getting better as they move fast.
Oh,
So I
that's so
think
nice. Yeah.
otherwise you're just going to move fast and it'll fall apart. So I think
Yeah, no kidding.
get the
We
simple
before
stuff right.
we came on today, we talked also about, I had this thesis that professional sport was moving ahead and then corporate culture looks to professional sport to create elite performance. And you have this thesis that it actually often goes the other way. And one of the observations you made is that in in corporate land, we have things like best places to work. We have these aspirational um, awards that you can or titles that you can apply for by hitting a criteria. And you mentioned that that doesn't exist in sport, and I thought that was really interesting. Is that something that could actually produce change at scale for sport? Is that something that you think is a good idea, or does that lend itself to a whole other level of bureaucracy and who knows what that's not so good? Is there a sweet spot that could be struck that could be useful?
I think it'd be great looking at case studies on the sweet spot. It's definitely going to be a passion project. I think yeah, like it's definitely something I'm seeing that you would think sport is ahead. I think I and the teams can call us and tell us if we're wrong, but I don't know many teams that would have accredited best place to work, great place to work, keep well mark, what we call it over here. And basically that's an accredited well-being standard, right? As to, ISO quality management as to how we do things from a well-being sort of provision of service and people. And yeah, like if you look at a franchise in the States, there's the sports side, there's the business side. They do spend time together. Um, they all want to win. Why are we not seeing teams striving not just to tick the box, but to do it for all the reasons that actually would make a big difference to retention, to developing those leaders, to getting players to last longer at a higher level, to
Yeah.
probably improve evaluation of the teams, to get more bums in seats and jersey sales. And I mean, I had that question 6 years ago, Julian, 7 years ago, and it's still there. Like, I still don't see many sports teams. You see a couple of teams now that are looking at positive psychology and performance psychology staff, but I still don't see many departments or ecosystems geared around bringing that in. So I think
Hmm.
there's still loads of work to be done in the sports world on that. Yeah, just this is a good place to work. We don't want to burn out. Intensity is fine, but we're going to look after everyone here. I think
And
there's
maybe
a
that
lot of
ends
work
up
to be done.
converting. Maybe that translates to championships in a different way or not in a different way, in the only way, because there's only one way to win a championship. But you'd like to think that if you did do that passion project study of the sweet spot of who's actually done it right, you'd find that they, in reaching that point, prevented a lot of waste. I think that's one of my pet peeves in the world is waste. I hate waste because it's
It's a
just a
bad word.
waste of potential, waste of money, waste of resources, waste of talent. You'd like to think that if they were doing all those things right, and maybe that's a key to making the index appropriate, is that it's about preventing waste of those resources that are important, including sustainable human talent and lifespan and health span and all that stuff. So I think you're the guy for the job. I think you're the one who's going to make this international standard for sports.
Yeah, I'll just say to you, like, waste is a terrible word. And I think the flip is like, can we care a little bit more about
Mm.
people
Mm.
and like 100%, like, I'm not just saying that. I think care, consideration. I was speaking to someone last night at a team, head of HR, head of people. She just seemed really stressed. And I was like, why are you so stressed? And she's like, hard at the moment. I was like, why is it so hard at the moment? She's like, people are kind of bickering and giving out. I was like, why? Is there a different way? Can there not be a different way? So again, it's just that's that's definitely a rabbit hole for me. But I think I'd like to find more because a rising tide lifts all boats.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, there's a lot of teams that they're okay if people work long and intensity and burnout is just part of what's on the walls. And I don't know. I'm not a
I don't
fan.
know either. I don't know either. And I mean, as we get to this last question, my closing question, which does pertain to I guess one of my hopes, but it is also a worry, sort of like waste is also the flip side of caring. One of my hopes is that by rising the tide using AI, that some of this busy work that causes people to feel like they're burning out could be replaced by a knowledge base that is very, very fast and based on great information. But I think the flip side of that is we also run the risk of AI having us move faster and we still don't recover. And that's just going to amplify the kind of culture you're talking about where people are burning out, people are tired because they're running too hard. So, I don't know if you have any comments on that. You can factor it into this answer on the last question, which is the question I'm asking every guest this season has to do with AI. Looking ahead, the most meaningful way that you are using or you imagine using AI to create more time, clarity, impact, et cetera, for yourself. This is kind of your open David Clancy AI question. How would you like to tackle it? Tell me anything.
Love what you said before the question. Uh, I think busyness is a problem, right? Like when I feel I'm going busy, like that's just a recipe for destruction. So I think where I've learned to bring AI in, and then where our company has become more AI and tech enabled, is just remove the stuff that the humans aren't supposed to be doing as much, or we don't have to be doing, because that's not our sweet spot. That's not where our magic or strength is. So admin, the ops stuff, um, the automation things, the process stuff that doesn't need us, and we're big advocates for creativity, Gillian. So I think if people are gonna, again, and it's so easy to get overwhelmed with AI. I mean, I was listening to Peter Diamandis and Musk yesterday for 20 minutes, and I went, "Oh my God, like this is if Elon is saying that every morning he's waking up and there's something else, it's like, oh my God, what about the rest of us?" So I'm I kind of only stick to the couple of lanes of AI that have helped so far, and then I maybe add one new tool when I feel I'm ready for it, and I try to ask someone who's played around with it, or I go onto HubSpot, or I do a little mini course in it, and I try to integrate that personally and then into our
Mm,
team system, and that
mm.
way I don't get too overwhelmed.
So
But
true.
I feel, so I feel for anyone who's trying to bring it to life is, again, ask, where could something like that bring benefit and help me? And there's definitely a solution there for you out there, and have a go. Don't be afraid. Like it's helped us massively with content and brand and systems and flows for recruitment and all these sort of outreach programs. So again, it can free up so much time, but don't feel you need to use every tool under the sun. Like you can be selective, and you can always play around with a few and find the ones that work for you. And so that's kind of where my head goes, Gillian.
I like it. It's a very measured approach where you are dosing the use of it experimentally. And then I think that's a real powerful word you used, which was integrating like carefully. You're integrating mindfully. You're not bringing it all in like a fire hose, which is, I think, where the overwhelm can happen.
Let it
So
be
that's very,
iterative.
very
Let it
helpful.
be iterative, you know?
Exact
Play around and
iterative, such a
experiment
good
a bit.
word. Such
Yeah.
a good word. Well, as I said earlier, I think elite sports always been a laboratory for human performance, but the question is whether or not it can also become a laboratory for human flourishing. And I think you've given us some really clear direction on how that's possible today. David Clancy, I want to thank you so much for joining me, and I wish you the most wonderful day.
Gillian, absolute pleasure to spend time with you today. Wishing you all the best. Thanks very much today. It was great.
Thank you.
Thank you.